Donald Trump walked into that studio certain he could humiliate a black congresswoman on live TV. But when Jasmine Crockett opened her black folder, 31 seconds of silence ripped through the nation. In that pause, private prison stocks crashed, ICE agents turned on their own boss, and veterans who once backed him stood guard against his policies. One debate became a chain reaction, and the man who thought he was untouchable suddenly looked cornered and afraid. The cameras cut back to the studio in New York. The set of 60 Minutes was glowing under the hot lights, the air electric with anticipation. Anderson Cooper sat at the center, calm as ever, his silver hair catching the light. To his right, President Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, smug and ready to deliver sound bites. To Cooper's left, Jasmine Crockett sat upright, steady and silent, her black folder resting on the table like a weapon no one else had noticed. Cooper looked into the camera, his voice measured but carrying the weight of the moment. "Good evening, America," he said. "Tonight we bring you a special live edition on immigration and security. 75 million of you are watching. My guests are President Donald Trump and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett." The red recording light blinked on. The trap was set. Carlos Martinez wasn't just another headline. He was a Vietnam veteran who had served 3 tours, earned a Purple Heart, and carried scars that most Americans would never see. 3 days before the interview, he was dropping his granddaughter off at school in Dallas when ICE agents surrounded his car. Neighbors filmed the scene on their phones. The video was shaky, vertical, hard to watch, but the sound cut through everything. A child screaming, "That's my grandpa! He was in the Army! Please don't take him!" The girl's voice cracked with panic, and in that moment, a decorated veteran who had given everything to his country was shoved into a van like a criminal, right in front of the little girl he was raising. When the footage played on the studio monitor, the air changed. The room that had been buzzing with the clash of politics went silent. You could hear the hum of the lights, the shuffle of someone's shoes, the faint click of a pen in the control room. Even the camera operator stopped breathing for a second. Anderson Cooper leaned forward, his tone sharper now. He turned to the president and asked the question millions at home were already asking. "Mr. President, how does a decorated veteran with full documentation end up in ICE detention?" Trump's hands started moving before the words came, carving shapes in the air like they always did when he was cornered. "Anderson, first of all, we have the best border security in history. The best. Everyone says so. Sometimes mistakes happen, very rare, but we're keeping Americans safe from the invasion of criminals and drugs." It was the same speech he had given 100 times before, a shield of repetition that usually worked. But not tonight. Then, as if rehearsed, he swiveled toward Crockett. His tone sharpened, ready to strike. "And you know who doesn't support keeping Americans safe? Democrats like her. Do you know what she did before Congress? She was a public defender. While soldiers like Mr. Martinez were defending our country, she was defending criminals, the worst criminals. She never wore the uniform, never served her country, but now she wants to lecture me about protecting America." He leaned back, satisfied, as if he had delivered the knockout blow. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch at Trump's attack. She didn't even look at him. Instead, she reached for the black folder sitting in front of her. The clasp snapped open with a sharp click that cut through the silence, and for the first time, Trump's smirk flickered. She slid out the first document and placed it flat on the table where the cameras could zoom in. "Mr. President," she said calmly, "on March 15th, you signed Executive Order 14,226. You promised it would revolutionize immigrant detention through private sector excellence." Her finger tapped the highlighted section. "But Section 4 gave your administration full authority to reallocate resources to private contractors without oversight." Another paper came out of the folder, this one stamped with federal seals. Within 30 days, ICE awarded $1.2 billion in new contracts to 3 companies: American Detention Solutions, Patriot Holding Corporation, Freedom Facilities Management. She let the names hang in the air before delivering the next blow. The CEOs of those companies collectively donated $47 million to your 2024 campaign, the single largest contribution from the private prison sector in American history. The control room caught it instantly. Cooper leaning slightly forward, eyes narrowing. It was a signal every producer recognized. He smelled blood in the water. Trump's hands tightened on the armrest, his voice jumping in before she could finish. That's fake news. Those are legitimate companies doing important work. Everyone knows it, but the words didn't land. The studio wasn't buying it, and neither was Anderson Cooper. The tension in the room thickened, like everyone was holding their breath waiting for the next strike. Crockett hadn't raised her voice, but she didn't need to. The evidence was lined up in neat rows on the table, each page heavier than the last. Crockett didn't waste time. She tapped her tablet and a chart filled the big monitor behind them. The bright colors told a story no slogan could erase. "Here are the numbers from your own Department of Homeland Security," she said, her voice steady. 73% of people detained by ICE in Texas had no criminal record at all. 18% had only traffic violations. 5% were misdemeanors. And just 4% were felonies. She turned toward Trump, the silence hanging heavy. "Mr. President, you keep calling them criminals, but your own data says otherwise." Trump's face flushed red. He jerked forward, snatching at the documents on the desk. Cameras caught the moment clearly, his hand grabbing the page, fingers crumpling the evidence as he tried to tear it in half. For a split second, the room broke into chaos. Secret Service agents pushed closer, unsure if this was about to turn into a scene they'd have to contain. Producers in the control room shouted over each other, trying to decide whether to cut to commercial. But Crockett didn't move. She stayed calm, her voice slicing through the noise. "Tear it if you want. I have dozens of copies. You can't rip the truth out of existence." Trump froze, still clutching the page. The camera zoomed in on the wrinkled chart in his hand, the bright red slice showing just 4%. In that moment, it didn't matter how loud he yelled. The number was burned into the screen and into the minds of everyone watching. Crockett leaned forward and tapped her tablet. Suddenly, a child's voice filled the studio speakers, high-pitched, trembling, but clear enough to cut straight through the air. "I want my mommy. I've been good. Please. I want my mommy." It was the voice of a 4-year-old girl, Amy Rodriguez, crying inside a detention center. The sound froze the entire room. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to hesitate. The director motioned for a close-up. The camera zoomed in on the control booth, where one of the technicians had tears streaming down her face. A boom mic operator's arm shook so badly that the pole dipped into the frame. Nobody yelled cut. Nobody dared to stop it. The audio kept playing, and it was unbearable. Then Crockett reached into her folder again. This time she pulled out a stack of photographs, each one printed on plain white paper, the kind you'd see marked as evidence in a courtroom. One after another, she spread them across the table and then tossed the rest down like a dealer laying out cards. "These," she said, "are the faces of 127 children currently being held in a converted Walmart facility in Dallas." The black and white images stared back at the cameras. Toddlers, school kids, teenagers, all with the same haunted look. Trump's face twisted, his voice cracked into a shout. "Actors, all of them. Fake. These are staged photos, fake stories, paid protesters." His words echoed against the silence, but the damage was already done. The audience in the studio began to murmur, whispers turning into a wave of disbelief. Viewers at home weren't just hearing statistics anymore. They were hearing children beg for their mothers and seeing rows of faces that looked like their own kids, their own neighbors. Crockett reached once more into her folder and this time pulled out an old leather-bound book. She held it up so the cameras could see the faded spine before reading aloud. "This is the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, she said, her voice calm but cutting. She turned to the marked page. "All good citizens are hereby commanded to aid and assist in the capture of any person suspected of being a fugitive." Suspected, not proven. Appearance was enough. She lowered the book and immediately lifted a modern document, stamped with ICE's official seal. "Now here," she continued, "is your administration's enforcement guideline from 2024. Agents are authorized to detain individuals suspected of unlawful presence based on reasonable indicators, including but not limited to physical appearance, language, or location of encounter." The room was so quiet the audience could hear the rustle of paper. Crockett held the 2 pages side by side, her voice steady. 174 years apart. The language is almost unchanged. Then it was about runaway slaves. Today it's about immigrants. The difference is not in the words, it's only in what you call it. Trump lurched forward, voice booming through the studio. That's different. Completely different. You can't compare the two. Crockett didn't blink. She looked him dead in the eye and said evenly, "The only difference, Mr. President, is that today you call it policy." That was when the tension broke. A man in the audience stood up, shouting, "Shame!" Others followed, their voices rising in anger. The security team moved quickly, trying to calm the chaos as more people in the crowd started yelling. The studio, meant to be a controlled space, suddenly felt like it was on the edge of a riot. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second. Crockett didn't stop with the children. She slid 3 photographs across the table, placing them directly in front of Trump, where the cameras could catch every detail. "These are not strangers," she said. "They are American patriots." She tapped the first photo. Marcus Williams, an Army Ranger who fought in Iraq and came home with medals and nightmares. The second, Maria Santos, a combat doctor who saved soldiers under fire in Afghanistan. The third, David Kim, a Navy Chief Petty Officer who served 20 years and raised a daughter who once wrote her school project about her hero, her dad. "These men and women gave everything to this country," Crockett said, her voice hardening. "And under your policies, they were treated as criminals." The camera cut to Trump's face, his jaw tight, eyes darting. Then it happened. From the middle of the audience, a man in a faded army jacket stood up. It was Marcus himself. His voice cut through the studio like a blade. "Mr. President," he shouted, his chest rising and falling, "you called me a criminal? After I bled for this country? After I buried friends who never made it home? You dare call me that?" His voice cracked but carried all the fury of betrayal. The audience erupted in applause, the sound booming off the studio walls. People stood to their feet, clapping, shouting, some with tears in their eyes. For the first time, Secret Service agents looked unsure, shifting nervously as the crowd roared behind Marcus. The cameras caught every second, an American hero confronting the commander-in-chief face to face. Trump opened his mouth, but only managed a choked response. This is a setup," he stammered, waving his hand weakly. "All staged." Fake. But his words were drowned out by the clapping, the cheers, the unmistakable sound of ordinary Americans siding with the soldier and not the president. Crockett reached into her black folder again, pulling out a document stamped confidential in red. She held it high so the cameras could lock on. "This is an internal memo from your own VA secretary," she said, her voice steady but sharp. She unfolded the page and read it aloud, each word slicing through the air. "Per executive guidance, $847 million designated for veteran mental health services will be redirected to support expanded ICE operations." She let the paper fall flat on the desk, the red text glowing under the studio lights. "That's money cut directly from PTSD treatment, suicide prevention, and substance abuse programs." The studio gasped. Trump's face flushed deep red. He shouted before Cooper could even react. "Fake! That's fake! Completely fake!" But Cooper leaned forward, no longer hiding his anger. His voice carried a weight that even Trump couldn't shout over. "So you took nearly $1 billion meant for suicidal veterans and used it to build cages?" Trump shook his head violently, sputtering. No, it's not true. It's a lie." But Crockett was already one step ahead. She pulled out her phone, holding it up for the cameras. "Let's find out," she said calmly. "I have Secretary Johnson's number right here. We can call him live, on air, and he can confirm or deny this memo himself." Her thumb hovered over the dial button. That was when Trump snapped. He lurched across the table, reaching for the phone like he could rip the truth out of her hands. Gasps erupted from the audience as Secret Service agents leapt forward, grabbing his arms before he could snatch it. The entire studio exploded into chaos. Producers yelling in the control room, the audience screaming, cameras shaking as operators scrambled to keep up. In the middle of it all, Crockett stayed seated, phone still in her hand, calm as ever. Her voice cut through the noise, cold and sharp. "You can try to take my phone, Mr. President, but you can't take the truth." The studio was still buzzing from the chaos when Crockett leaned forward, her voice calm and almost gentle. "Mr. President," she said, "let me ask you something. What if your daughter Ivanka was shopping in Miami, speaking to her child in her mother's accent, and someone called ICE? What if she didn't have her ID on her that day? Under your executive order, she could be detained. Your granddaughter could watch her mother dragged away into a cage, wondering if she would ever see her again." Trump froze. His mouth opened, then closed, but no words came out. The cameras zoomed in tight, catching every twitch of his face, every bead of sweat on his forehead. Then on the broadcast feed, a countdown clock appeared in the corner of the screen. Producers in the control room had started timing. 1 second, 5, 10. The silence stretched, unbearable. Anderson Cooper didn't move. Crockett didn't blink. The audience didn't make a sound. At homes across America, millions leaned forward, watching the President of the United States sit mute, paralyzed, with nothing to say. 15 seconds. 20. The country had never seen anything like it. At 25 seconds, the camera cut wide, showing the whole table. Trump staring at the floor, Crockett staring at him, the clock ticking. At 31 seconds, he finally exploded, his voice high-pitched and broken. "Where's your birth certificate?" he shouted, jabbing a finger at Crockett. "Have you even shown anyone your birth certificate?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop. The audience gasped, but no one clapped. No one spoke. Even the Secret Service agents stiffened. The moment landed like a grenade. 31 seconds of silence had shattered a presidency, and what came after only made it worse. Trump shot to his feet, his chair rolling backward with a screech. His face was purple with rage, spit catching the studio lights as he pointed at Crockett. "You're a nasty woman! A nasty, nasty woman!" he screamed before storming toward the exit. The cameras followed as he shoved past the stage crew. The heavy studio door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. For 3 long seconds, no one moved. Then the audience erupted, some gasping, others shouting, as America realized the president had just walked out of a live interview. It didn't take minutes, it took seconds for the fallout to explode online. The hashtags number 31 seconds and receipts on air lit up Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Millions of posts replayed the silence, the child's audio, the slammed door. Memes multiplied. Late-night hosts had material for months, but the damage was already real-time. Markets opened the next morning in chaos. CoreCivic and GEO Group, two of the largest private prison contractors, saw their stock prices nosedive so fast that trading was halted. By noon, both were down more than 20%. At the same time, ICE agents across the country staged what they called a sick-out. In Dallas, more than half the morning shift simply didn't show up. In Houston, supervisors walked into briefing rooms that were nearly empty. Reporters swarmed the story, quoting agents who said they signed up to catch terrorists, not to drag grandmothers and veterans out of their homes. And then came the veterans. In city after city, men and women pulled old uniforms from closets and stood outside schools and churches. They weren't holding weapons, just standing guard. One ranger outside an elementary school in Dallas told a reporter, "We protected democracy abroad. Now we're protecting it at home. They're not touching these kids on our watch." The images spread across the country, uniforms in the sunlight, American flags waving beside them. By nightfall, the crisis had reached Washington. The phones in Congress wouldn't stop ringing. Democrats and Republicans alike were flooded with calls from veterans, business owners, and families. The pressure was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, congressional leaders announced a bipartisan investigation into ICE contracts and the diversion of VA funds. The statement was blunt. This is not about politics. This is about who we are as a nation. The presidency wasn't just shaken, it was in free fall, and everyone knew it. The protests didn't look like the marches of years past. This time, the faces in the streets were a mix of veterans in old uniforms, families carrying photographs of detained loved ones, and ordinary citizens who decided silence was no longer an option. Crowds gathered outside courthouses, city halls, and state capitals. Veterans walked arm in arm with immigrant families. Mothers carried signs with their children's names written in bold letters. The message was simple: no more cages, no more lies. Congress felt the weight. After weeks of hearings and testimony, both parties came together in a way few thought possible. The Veterans and Citizens Protection Act was introduced, a sweeping law that demanded oversight of ICE detentions, protected veterans from wrongful arrest, and outlawed the diversion of VA funds for immigration raids. Trump vetoed it the moment the bill hit his desk, calling it weak on crime and a gift to illegals. But for the first time in years, Congress stood united. The House and Senate both voted to override his veto by overwhelming margins. The law became reality. The moment the cameras captured next would go down in history. Across the country, ICE agents began turning in their badges. Some walked into local offices and handed them over quietly. Others made it public. On the evening news, a line of agents in Texas was shown removing their IDs and tossing their handcuffs onto the pavement. One veteran agent looked straight into the camera and said, "I joined to protect this country, not to destroy families. I won't be part of it anymore." The clatter of metal hitting the ground echoed like a closing chapter. For the first time since the chaos began, there was a sense of something larger than anger or fear. There was a sense of justice. 6 months later, the place that once tore families apart became a symbol of healing. The old ICE detention facility in El Paso had been gutted, rebuilt, and renamed the Martinez Veterans Center. Where barbed wire once cut across the sky, now there were flags and fresh paint. Where cells once held frightened children, classrooms and counseling rooms had been built for veterans and their families. Carlos Martinez stood at the entrance in full dress uniform, medals shining under the Texas sun. His hands trembled slightly as he held the scissors, but his granddaughter Emma stood by his side, steadying him. She was only 8, but she stood tall, shoulders back, like a little soldier in training. Together they cut the ribbon, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed, but the moment felt more like a family gathering than a political event. Jasmine Crockett spoke next, her voice calm but firm. "The truth destroyed what needed destroying," she said, "and from that destruction, something better was built. This center isn't just for veterans. It's for every American who believes we are stronger when we stand together." Her words hung in the air, simple but powerful, the kind that would be replayed for years to come. Later that afternoon, little Amy Rodriguez sat at a picnic table near the center, her mother by her side. With a crayon clutched tight, she scribbled carefully in her notebook. A reporter leaned down and asked, "What are you writing?" Amy looked up, her eyes serious in a way no 4-year-old should be, and answered, "I'm writing what America means." She turned the page around. In uneven but determined letters it read, "America means everyone belongs." The crowd quieted. For once there were no chants, no arguments, no anger. Just silence, then a swell of applause that rolled like thunder. In that moment, the story wasn't about politics or power anymore. It was about belonging. And it was about hope. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit the like button to push it further, share it so more people can see the truth, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Your voice matters, and together we can keep stories like this alive.